The Siege of Cawnpore was a key episode in the Indian Rebellion of 1857. The besieged company forces and civilians in Kanpur were unprepared for an extended siege and surrendered to rebel forces under Nana Sahib, in return for a safe passage to Allahabad. However, under ambiguous circumstances, their evacuation from Kanpur turned into a massacre, and most of the men were killed. As an East India Company rescue force from Allahabad approached Kanpur, 120 British women and children captured by the sepoy forces were killed in what came to be known as the Bibigha massacre, their remains being thrown down a nearby well in an attempt to hide the evidence. Following the recapture of Kanpur and the discovery of the massacre, the outraged company forces engaged in widespread retaliation against captured rebel soldiers and local civilians. The murders greatly embittered the British rank and file against the sepoy rebels and inspired the war cry, "Remember Kanpur." Background: Kanpur was an important garrison town for the East India Company forces. Located on the Grand Trunk Road, it lay on the approaches to Sindh, Punjab and Awadh. By June 1857, the Indian Rebellion had spread to several areas near Kanpur, namely Meerut, Agra, Mathura, and Lucknow. However, the Indian sepoys at Kanpur initially remained loyal. The British general at Kanpur, Hugh Wheeler, knew the local language, had adopted local customs, and was married to an Indian woman. He was confident that the sepoys at Kanpur would remain loyal to him, and sent 2 British companies to besiege Lucknow. The British contingent in Kanpur consisted of around 900 people, including around 300 military men, around 300 women and children, and about 150 merchants, business owners, drummers, engineers and others. The rest were the native servants, who left soon after the commencement of the siege. In the case of a rebellion by the sepoys in Kanpur, the most suitable defensive location for the British was the magazine located in the north of the city. It had thick walls, ample ammunition and stores, and also hosted the local treasury. However, General Wheeler decided to take refuge in the south of the city, in an entrenchment composed of 2 barracks surrounded by a mud wall. There was a military building site to the south of Kanpur, where 9 barracks were being constructed at the Dragoon Barracks. The British soldiers found it difficult to dig deep trenches, as it was hot summer season. The area also lacked good sanitary facilities, and there was only 1 well. Also, there were several buildings overlooking the entrenchment that would provide cover for the attackers, allowing them to easily shoot down on the defenders. General Wheeler's choice of this location to make a stand remains controversial, given the availability of safer and more defensible places in Kanpur. It is believed that he was expecting reinforcements to come from the southern part of the city. He also assumed that, in case of a rebellion, the Indian troops would probably collect their arms, ammunition and money, and would head to Delhi, and therefore, he did not expect a long siege. Rebellion at Fatehgarh. The first sign of the rebellion at Kanpur came in the form of a rebellion at Fatehgarh, a military station on the banks of the Ganges. To disperse the Indian troops away from Kanpur, and lessen the chances of a rebellion, General Wheeler decided to send them on various missions. On one such mission, he sent the 2nd OUDH Irregulars to Fatehgarh. On the way to Fatehgarh, General Wheeler's forces under the command of Fletcher Hayes and Lieutenant Barber met 2 more Englishmen, Ferrer and Carey. On the night of the 31st of May 1857, Hayes and Carey departed to a nearby town to confer with the local magistrate. After their departure, the Indian troops rebelled and decapitated Ferrer. Barber was also killed, as he tried to escape. When Hayes and Carey came back the next morning, an older Indian officer galloped towards them and advised them to run away. However, as the Indian officer explained the situation to them, the rebel Indian sowars raced towards them. Hayes was killed as he tried to ride away, while Carey escaped to safety. Outbreak of Rebellion at Kanpur. There were 4 Indian regiments in Kanpur, the 1st, 53rd and 56th Native Infantry, and the 2nd Bengal Cavalry. Although the sepoys in Cawnpore had not rebelled, the European families began to drift into the entrenchment as the news of rebellion in the nearby areas reached them. The entrenchment was fortified, and the Indian sepoys were asked to collect their pay one by one, so as to avoid an armed mob. The Indian soldiers considered the fortification, and the artillery guns being primed, as a threat. On the night of the 2nd of June 1857, a British officer named Lieutenant Cox fired on his Indian guard while drunk. Cox missed his target, and was thrown into the jail for a night. The very next day, a hastily convened court acquitted him, which led to discontent among the Indian soldiers. There were also rumors that the Indian troops were to be summoned to a parade, where they were to be massacred. All these factors influenced him to rebel against the East India Company rule. The rebellion began at 1:30 a.m. on the 5th of June 1857, with 3 pistol shots from the rebel soldiers of the 2nd Bengal Cavalry. Elderly Risaldar Major Bhawani Singh, who chose not to hand over the regimental colours and join the rebel sepoys, was subsequently cut down by his subordinates. The 53rd and 56th Native Infantry, which were apparently the most loyal units in the area, were awoken by the shootings. Some soldiers of the 56th attempted to leave. The European artillery assumed that they were also rebelling, and opened fire on them. The soldiers of the 53rd were also caught in the crossfire. The 1st NI rebelled and left in the early morning of the 6th of June 1857. On the same day, the 53rd NI also went off, taking with them the regimental treasure and as much ammunition as they could carry. Around 150 sepoys remained loyal to General Wheeler. After obtaining arms, ammunition and money, the rebel troops started marching towards Delhi to seek further orders from Bahadur Shah II, who had been proclaimed the Badshah-e-Hind. The British officers were relieved, thinking that they would not face a long siege. Nana Sahib's involvement. Nana Sahib was the adopted heir to Baji Rao II, the ex-Peshwa of the Maratha Confederacy. The East India Company had decided that the pension and honours of the lineage would not be passed on to Nana Sahib, as he was not a natural-born heir. Nana Sahib had sent his envoy Dewan Azamullah Khan to London, to petition the Queen against the company's decision, but failed to evoke a favourable response. Amid the chaos in Cawnpore in 1857, Nana Sahib entered the British magazine with his contingent. The soldiers of the 53rd Native Infantry, which was guarding the magazine, were not fully aware of the situation in the rest of the city. They assumed that Nana Sahib had come to guard the magazine on behalf of the British, as he had earlier declared his loyalty to the British, and had even sent some volunteers to be at the disposal of General Wheeler. However, once Nana Sahib was inside the magazine, at the urging of the rebels, he announced that he was a participant in the rebellion against the British, and intended to be a vassal of Bahadur Shah II. After taking possession of the treasury, Nana Sahib advanced up the Grand Trunk Road. His aim was to restore the Maratha Confederacy under the Peshwa tradition, and he decided to capture Cawnpore. On his way, Nana Sahib met with rebel soldiers at Kalyanpur. The soldiers were on their way to Delhi, to meet Bahadur Shah II. Nana Sahib wanted them to go back to Cawnpore, and help him in defeating the British. The rebels were reluctant at first, but decided to join Nana Sahib, when he promised to double their pay and reward them with gold, if they were to destroy the British entrenchment. Attack on Wheeler's entrenchment. On the 5th of June 1857, Nana Sahib sent a polite note to General Wheeler, informing him that he intended to attack on the following morning, at 10 a.m. On the 6th of June, Nana Sahib's forces attacked the British entrenchment at 10:30 a.m. The British were not adequately prepared for the attack, but managed to defend themselves for a long time, as the attacking forces were reluctant to enter the entrenchment. Nana Sahib's forces had been led to falsely believe that the entrenchment had gunpowder-filled trenches that would explode if they got closer. As the news of Nana Sahib's advances against the British garrison spread, several of the rebel sepoys joined him. By the 10th of June, he was believed to be leading around 12,000 to 15,000 Indian soldiers. The British held out in their makeshift fort for 3 weeks with little water and food supplies. Many died as a result of sunstroke and lack of water. As the ground was too hard to dig graves, the British would pile the dead bodies of their killed outside the buildings, and drag and dump them inside a dried well during the night. The lack of sanitation facilities led to spread of diseases such as dysentery and cholera, further weakening the defenders. There was also a small outbreak of smallpox, although this was relatively confined. During the first week of the siege, Nana Sahib's forces encircled the entrenchment, created loopholes and established firing positions in the surrounding buildings. Captain John Moore of the 32nd Light Infantry countered this by launching nighttime sorties. Nana Sahib withdrew his headquarters to Savada House, situated about 2 miles away. In response to Moore's sorties, Nana Sahib decided to attempt a direct assault on the British entrenchment, but the rebel soldiers displayed a lack of enthusiasm. On the 11th of June, Nana Sahib's forces changed their tactics. They started concentrated firing on specific buildings, firing endless salvos of round shot into the entrenchment. They successfully damaged some of the smaller barrack buildings, and also tried to set fire to the buildings. The first major assault by Nana Sahib's side took place on the evening of the 12th of June. However, the attacking soldiers were still convinced that the British had laid out gunpowder-filled trenches, and did not enter the area. On the 13th of June, the British lost their hospital building to a fire, which destroyed most of their medical supplies and caused the deaths of a number of wounded and sick artillerymen who burned alive in the inferno. The loss of the hospital was a major blow to the defenders. Nana Sahib's forces gathered for an attack, but were repulsed by the canister shots from artillery under the command of Lieutenant George Ashe. By the 21st of June, the British had lost around a third of their numbers. Wheeler's repeated messages to Henry Lawrence, the commanding officer in Lucknow, could not be answered as that garrison was itself under siege. Assault on the 23rd of June. The sniper fire and the bombardment continued until the 23rd of June 1857, the 100th anniversary of the Battle of Plassey, which took place on the 23rd of June 1757 and was one of the pivotal battles leading to the expansion of British rule in India. One of the driving forces of the Sepoy Rebellion was a prophecy which predicted the downfall of East India Company rule in India exactly 100 years after the Battle of Plassey. This prompted the rebel soldiers under Nana Sahib to launch a major attack on the British entrenchment on the 23rd of June 1857. The rebel soldiers of the 2nd Bengal Cavalry led the charge, but were repulsed with canister shot when they approached within 50 yards of the British entrenchment. After the cavalry assault, the soldiers of the 1st Native Infantry launched an attack on the British, advancing behind cotton bales and parapets. They lost their commanding officer, Radhay Singh, to the opening volley from the British. They had hoped to get protection from cotton bales. However, the bales caught fire from the canister shot, and became a hazard to them. On the other side of the entrenchment, some of the rebel soldiers engaged in a hand combat against 17 British men led by Lieutenant Mowbray Thompson. By the end of the day, the attackers were unable to gain an entry into the entrenchment. The attack left over 25 rebel soldiers dead, with very few casualties on the British side. Surrender of the British forces. The British garrison had taken heavy losses as a result of successive bombardments, sniper fire, and assaults. It was also suffering from disease and low supplies of food, water and medicine. General Wheeler's personal morale had been low, after his son Lieutenant Gordon Wheeler was decapitated by a round shot. With approval of General Wheeler, a Eurasian civil servant called Donor Shepherd slipped out of the entrenchment in disguise to ascertain the condition of Nana Sahib's forces. He was quickly imprisoned by the rebel soldiers. At the same time, Nana Sahib's forces were wary of entering the entrenchment, as they believed that it had gunpowder-filled trenches. Nana Sahib and his advisors came up with a plan to end the deadlock. On the 24th of June, they sent a female European prisoner, Mrs. Rose Greenway, to the entrenchment with their message. In return for surrender, Nana Sahib promised the safe passage of the British to the Satish Auragat, a landing on the Ganges from which they could depart for Allahabad. General Wheeler rejected the offer, because it had not been signed, and there was no guarantee that the offer was made by Nana Sahib himself. The next day, the 25th of June, Nana Sahib sent a second note, signed by himself, through another elderly female prisoner, Mrs. Jacobi. The British camp divided into two groups, one in favour of continuing the defence, while the second group was willing to trust Nana Sahib. During the next 24 hours, there was no bombardment by Nana Sahib's forces. Finally, General Wheeler decided to surrender, in return for a safe passage to Allahabad. After a day of preparation, and burying their dead, the British decided to leave for Allahabad on the morning of the 27th of June 1857.